Hello and welcome to Board Game Gumbo. Today we're unboxing Alma Mater by eggertspiele and Plan B Games. This is a game for 2 to 4 players that plays in 90 to 150 minutes. This is from the same artist and designers as Coimbra, which was one of my favorite games in 2018, so I'm really excited to see what they've done here. This is another Euro-style game that they've designed. Here's our rulebook. It's a pretty intricate setup for this game, but like Coimbra, it seems to be pretty intuitive in the way that everything works. The board is fairly busy, but once you start playing, most things seem to make sense. A lot of iconography going on here, and like Coimbra, there's a lot involved in the final scoring. You'll essentially score for pretty much everything you can do in the game by final scoring. There are special rules for 2 players. So the 3 and 4 player game are the same, and the 2-player game has its own special rules. And then obviously a little cheat sheet in the back of the book here for all the different cards and what exactly they do, the abilities they give you. And again, there are quite a few different components to this, but it all looks pretty straightforward once you get it on the board and playing. Here's the board itself. So you can see, starting up here, you have the player track, which is obviously going to go around the entirety of the board. You have some research tracks here, going from E, if we flip the board out, all the way down to A. So there'll be research cards here. And up here, you have different tracks for the player pieces, which will be ranked based off of where you are on the research track. Basically, the higher you are on the research track, the more valuable your books are during the course of the game. You have spots here where you can acquire different student tiles, and the cost of those student tiles are listed at the top here. Again, this is where this research track comes in, because as your books are more popular on the research track, they're more required to buy these students. So in this first row, if you want to buy a student here, you have to pay 2 books of one type and a book of a different type. But these 2 books you have to pay have to be from the 1 or the 2 column of the research track. So your books are going to be more popular. If you're higher up on this track, they're going to be more used, I should say. And then as you get down here, the students become more expensive. You see these little gray circles here. Those are all worker placement locations, because this is essentially a worker placement game. Over here, we have spots for the teacher cards, or the professor cards, I believe they're called. And those are a little more complicated. They have several spots here, and I'll explain those when we get to those cards. On the bottom of the board here, we have some more general locations you can go to. More of these gray circles that do several different things. This lets you buy dictionaries. This lets you advance up research tracks, and this just lets you buy points with money. Multiple people can go to these locations, but the first person that goes to a location only has to put 1 worker, second person has to put 2, and so on. Down here, you can exchange workers for money. Any number of players can go here. This also determines the player order for subsequent rounds. And over here, you can buy books from other players and also buy dictionaries. The final spot we have down here is called the Hall of Fame. These are essentially 3 different objectives that you can accomplish throughout the game, and they give you special abilities, which will be little tiles, which will be put up here. So let's go ahead and look at the rest of our components. We have a few cardboard punch-outs to go through. These are all the different student tiles. So you'll see these are what looks like perhaps law school students, and then you have some here on top. Looks like maybe School of Arts. When you acquire these students from the row by placing a worker there, some of them give you immediate benefits, which would be this lightning bolt, and some of them give you abilities. You also have some, like these up top here, which give you a worker placement spot that you can now go to. And again, this symbol lets you move up the research track. So several pages of these punch boards for the students, and all these punch out pretty easily. There is money in the game, so there's of course cardboard money to punch out. And then you've got these little tokens which are used for varying costs. So we'll punch those out too. Everything punches out really well. The cardboard's nice and thick. So there's no concern so far in terms of quality. We got, looks like School of Medicine students. Here are, I believe they call them glory tiles. And these are going to be for those objectives that you complete down here on the bottom. So at the start of each game, you'll put out one of these tiles. So these little objectives that people can accomplish will give you different requirements on them from game to game. More money to punch out. And then up here, we have bookshelves. So each player is going to have a set of bookshelves in their own color. So this will be for the blue player, and they'll have a total of 7. And then here for the red player. You can do a couple things with these bookshelves, but I'll show you more what they do when we get to the player boards themselves. And then more of the same here on our final sheet of punchboard. So here are the player boards, which are called universities. In these games, there is 1 per player. And you can see that they are color coded. So we have 1 per player color. So let's go ahead and take a look at one. So obviously there's a lot going on here. They give you a nice little reminder here at the bottom of how in-game scoring goes. So you can always keep that in mind. And these are recessed, if you can see, to hold your students, which is nice. It's nice that that's becoming kind of a industry standard, these recessed boards. And then they are recessed at the top as well for your bookshelves. So obviously here is where your students will go, and you'll place them row first. So you start with your starting student, and the next student you acquire will go to the first spot in the B row. And then the next one you acquire will go to the second spot in the A row, and back and forth. When you get to this location, you gain an extra worker. These locations require additional money. You don't gain that money. You have this listing up here. That's the number of books you can carry over between rounds. Here's where your worker supply will go. And at the top here is where your bookshelves will go. Again, you'll have 7, and they'll be placed in a row like this. The reason they're placed here, there's a couple different reasons. One is that players can buy books from you. Whenever you acquire a book, if it's a book of your color, you can choose to display it in your bookshelf. And then later, another player can take an action to buy that book from you. They do that by paying the cost, and then they gain the victory points on that bookshelf and then flip it over, and that bookshelf will not give victory points for the rest of the game. So you can continue to load books into your bookshelf, and people can continue to buy them from you, but they'll no longer gain those victory points. And as you can see, books get more expensive, but you'll actually be filling from the right to the left. So this would be the first book you would place. So the first book you always have in your display will cost 4 coins from other players. Finally, we get to the cards and the other components for the game. And you can see there's a nice little insert here, little plastic insert. Coimbra also had a nice insert. Unfortunately, one of the things about Coimbra's insert, and also appears to be the same for this one, is that it's not going to accommodate sleeve cards. That's not typically something I worry about with Euro games, but it could be a problem depending on if you really like to sleeve your cards. So here we have bus cards. These are for the objectives. Essentially, when you complete an objective, one of the 3 objectives down here, you'll take a bus card for that objective. So if you complete the A objective, you'll take an A card, B, and C. And all this will do is remind you that you've completed that objective, because there's also going to be one of the Chancellor cards on top of the deck of busts, and you will gain access to that special ability once you have the bust card in front of you. So all players can have those abilities. So 2 things are going to happen with these cards. First of all, there's going to be 1 on each objective, And those will be special abilities that every player can acquire during the course of the game by completing those specific objectives and getting the bust card underneath them. You'll be selecting these by player order, and player order is going to be determined by your starting resources, which we'll see in a minute. But all of these Chancellor cards give you a special ability that you can use throughout the course of the game. So here are our starting resource cards, and these will be drafted. Each player will draw 4 of these cards, keep 1, and then continue passing around the table until all players have 3 of these cards, with the last one being discarded from each player. These will give you your starting resources. So say you started with these 3 cards, your starting resources would be a total of 3 dictionaries, 3, 6, 9 books of your own color, because that's what that star means, 1 book of any color of your choice, and 2 money. Now, after every player receives their starting resources, you're then going to add up the numbers on the 3 cards that you drafted, and that will determine player order. So at the start of the game, I would have 21 from my cards, which seems like a lot, so I'm probably not selecting first. The first player will not only go first during the first round of the game, but they'll also get first choice of the Chancellor cards that are left available. So that's definitely something you want to keep in mind, and I think a really interesting way of doing both setup and first player determination. Next, we have Ignatius Cards, and then we have another pack of cards here. So here are our research cards. So at the beginning of the game, you're going to place these research cards out on that track we saw earlier, going from A all the way up to E. And these are listed on the back, so you'll choose one A card, and then you'll go through and end up with one E card, and they will fill up this track. And this will be a track that you'll start at the A card at the bottom and be able to move up. Whenever you move up, there's 2 ways to do it. One is through this black gear icon, which requires you to pay whatever resource is listed. So if you're here and you're moving up here, you have to pay 5 coins, plus an additional 2 for every worker you have. This one requires you to exhaust one of your professors or pay 5 coins. The other way to move up the track is through this green cog. You'll notice that the black cog allows you to move up 3 spaces, where the green one only allows you to move up 1. But when you move up via the green cog, you don't have to pay the cost. So you'll move up these research tracks, eventually getting to the top, which will give you a one-time bonus, and then you'll go on to the next card. So this card would be listed above here. Whenever you get to this spot here, you'll immediately go here, and then your next movement would move you to this spot and continuing upwards. Here we have our professor cards, and there's quite a few of them. As you've seen on the board, there's different types of professors, just as there are different types of students. So you'll arrange these by their symbology and then put them on their specific location. Whenever you want to acquire a professor, there's a couple different steps. One is you have to go to the location on the board. Secondly, you have to pay whatever resources are required. So let's say that this card was here. So you see on the left here, there's a couple different requirements. One, there's a monetary requirement, so I'm gonna have to pay 5 coins. Secondly, I'm gonna have to pay 2 of one book type, 1 of another book type, and 1 of a third book type. So say I paid green, black, and blue. Those books are going to stay here, or at least one of each will stay here. So there'll be a green book, black book, and a blue book listed here. Because green is the book that I paid the most of, I'll also put a green book here on this card, and then take this card and put it in front of me as I've just bought it. This does a couple different things. One, it sets the price for this professor for the rest of the game. So there will be more of these professor cards in this spot, and when another player decides they want to buy one of those professors, they now have to pay exactly what I paid, except they don't have to pay the coin cost because that's going to be covered up. Secondly, this professor is going to be in front of me, and he's going to have a book on him. He's worth points, regardless of if I use him or not. But if I want to use him during the round, which I can do once per round, I can activate him by paying the cost of whatever book is on him, and then exhausting him and getting whatever bonus he gives. That's called giving a lecture, and that's essentially how the professors work. You buy them, and then they give you special once-around abilities. Again, there's quite a few different ones to choose from. So there's a lot of different abilities for you to gain throughout the course of the game. Last few things we have in here, we have some pieces to mark player score and player order. So every player will have a couple different discs. And then we have these larger yellow discs that track the round that you're on and what phase you're in. You'll play a total of 6 rounds before you finally go to in-game scoring. We've got our workers here. So each player will have a group of workers. You'll start with 4, but you have a total of 6 that you can have by gaining the other 2 throughout the course of the game. And then we have the books. So first of all, we have yellow books, which are dictionaries that all players can gain access to. These are not wooden, they're plastic, but they're really interesting because they have some depth to them. And I don't know if you can quite see, but there's actually definition on the edges to make it look like pages. It's not just flat, which I think is kind of cool and interesting and something I don't think I've seen before. And then finally, we have all the books in the 4 player colors. Again, there are ways to gain books that are not of your color. In fact, it's a large part of the game. So even though, the red player may focus on gaining books of his own color, other players can gain them as well. And again, these books are really well done. Probably the most interesting component in the game, but that's pretty cool. Anyway, that is everything you're going to get in a copy of Alma Mater from Eggertspiele and Plan B Games.